Good morning. Welcome to the Staffordshire Police, Fire and Crime panel. I am starting the meeting at 10 o'clock because we are live recording. So hopefully I will call members in as quickly as possible. Okay, I think we're now all present. As a reminder, the filming of meetings, it is an open section of this meeting, it will be filmed and will appear live later broadcasting. We'll be mindful of that we may be observed. I'd like to move to the agenda. Item 1, please. Apologies.
We've received apologies from Councillors Lees, Doyle, Hudson and the Chairman, Councillor Peters.
Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations, members? I always say in this seat that if there's something that crops up as we are going through our agenda, please do not hesitate. Declare your declaration if it comes to mind. Item 3, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of October 2021. Do I have your approval that those meetings minutes are okay? Thank you. Item 4, we have questions to the Police, Fire, Crime Commissioner, from members of the public. I am aware that we do not have any. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman. We haven't received any questions from the public.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 5, we have decisions published by the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. There's two decisions. Do members have any questions to raise on those items? No, we can move on then. Ben, would you like to come in on that, Ben?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Morning, everybody. Just on the first item, the immediate detriment, this is reasonably, I can't believe how much time I've spent talking about pensions in this role. And I thought I understood complicated matters until I started discussing fire and police pensions. However, I took a decision quite early that I thought it was quite appropriate that people who have served a long time and earned a pension should get the pension that they are due. And whilst there is some confusion at the moment as we're between schemes, some individuals were clearly going to possibly lose out, but certainly didn't have certainty as they approached their retirement. So I was very keen that they did get certainty where it was straightforward to make calculations and help people put their minds at rest and know what their retirement situation was. We took the decision. It was then encouraged by the LGA, and a lot of other authorities took the decision as well. And subsequently, government has encouraged just a pause. I think there is a small risk associated with calculating a pension and then subsequently finding out it wasn't quite what we calculated, but I'm comfortable with the small risk. What that means is that in some situations there's still a slight pause on progressing with this. I think, to be fair, other places have got a bigger deal with the numbers and scale of the pensions that we have in Staffordshire. But my view is that people should get the pensions they're entitled to and have certainty. And as much as possible, that's what we're trying to do with this measure. Thank you. Just a brief comment on the SARC, that's the Sexual Assault Referral Service. Helen and I have met with the providers of that service. It's really excellent and provides an absolutely essential service for young people who are in really a terrible position in their lives. Very, very happy to keep commissioning that.
Any comments from that brief? If we'd like to move on then to item 6, the medium-term financial strategy, the MTFS police service. Commissioner, you would like to go through that with us, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to ask my colleague David here, who leads on financial matters, just to take us through some of the detail. But you'll be pleased, I'm sure, as members, to know that we're into the most exciting part of the annual calendar of looking at financial matters and budgets and so on. My view is that this is absolutely essential and a key part of my role as Commissioner. I think unusually, with the arrival of a new Chief Constable, less so with the arrival of the new Chief Fire Officer, because we've been involved in budget discussions for some months already with him and his team. But with the Chief Constable, there are almost certainly going to be some changes to how business is done, and I think there will be financial implications and decisions for him to make. So I see the budget process over the next 2 or 3 months as being flexible, and I'm going to be open to persuasion on a number of areas. Equally, very keen that we have a clear way forward, and that we are all the organisation is seen to be making contributions to our ultimate saving requirements. So you'll see some positive stuff in here about where we thought the year would end up and where it actually has, where we believe the settlement from government is likely to land. Equally, you'll see some challenging stuff around inflation. Feels real to me at the minute. Whether it's short term or not is the question. Is this several months of inflation at 3-4%, or is it 2 or 3 years? If it's 2 or 3 years, then a lot of the positivity in the settlements will very quickly be gobbled up by inflation. And of course, we've had a pay rise freeze for the public sector. The police have carried on doing their work without a pay rise for some time now. I think it's next year we will see a quite appropriate and reasonable pay agreement, and it's the right time for that. So again, the settlement will largely assist with that. What I don't think it means is at the end of 3 years we're going to have more money net in this system. So I'll pass over to David if I may, and then very happy the two of us will field some questions from you. Is that okay with you, Chairman?
That's fine by me, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction, and thank you, Commissioner, for that, in terms of introducing both of the papers that are in front of you today. I'd like to say before I start that obviously in terms of both papers, what we're looking at today is an update and a refresh of the current approved medium-term financial strategy. So this is the strategy that was approved by the panel back in the 1st of February for policing and the 15th of February for the fire and rescue service. So at the moment, both police and fire were undergoing the full budget process, which, as the Commissioner says, is the most exciting time of the year. And of course, we are eagerly awaiting further information in terms of the settlement information that's due from the government and due from the Home Office we believe at the early part of next week. I think the Chancellor talked about a date of the 6th of December, which is gone now, so we believe that we're looking at a date next week. So what the two papers in front of you today are basically a refresh around some of those key assumptions, and we've incorporated some of the significant and known changes into updating the position for next year and into the medium term, and hopefully that'll become clear within the detail of both of the papers. But I just wanted to make sure that you were all aware of the process that we've been through. You know, we are obviously going through that budget process, and we will be refreshing all of the details and all of the assumptions as we move into the budget setting process and the medium term when we come back and talk to you around the detail at the end of January and in February of next year. So if I can just pick off one or two of the key elements, if I may, Chairman, within the first paper, which is the medium-term financial strategy update for policing. So you'll all be aware that the medium-term financial strategy was approved by the Commissioner and was presented to the panel on the 1st of February this year. And the update therefore provides the panel, as I say, with that updated position based upon some of the key assumptions and some of the key areas of change that we know about at the moment. So the report runs through, and I'll go through in a moment, the reported position against budget for the year. So I'm going to give you a quick update of where we are financially. Look at some of the key assumptions and the budget process for the coming budget year and the medium term. I'm going to just mention the officer uplift numbers as well, just so you're all aware of the latest position. And also included in the paper are a number of budget sensitivities. And important, I'm just going to talk about the announcement that was made by the Chancellor as part of the budget on the 27th of October. So firstly, if I may, I just want to talk very briefly about the current financial position for policing. So this is the position presented as at the end of September, so that's the half-year position for the year. So overall, the position reported is a total forecast outturn of 221.6 million, which is around £500,000 favourable to the budget that was set at £222.1 million. Now, Chairman, whilst there are a number of variances within the year, I mean, overall, I'm pleased to say, obviously, that reported position is favourable, and we're on track to have a favourable position for the year end. So I've got no significant or major events to report to the panel that is affecting that overall position for the year end. Now, obviously, in terms of the budget process for next year, that's scheduled within paragraph 1.29 of the report. So this year, we're going through the full detail of building up the policing budget and the Commissioner's budget from a zero base. The Chief Constable actually this year's introduced a process similar to what we run in the fire service. So they've been running a number of budget challenge sessions. These have, as I say, been led by the Chief Constable. And these sessions are really looking at efficiencies in the current year, just testing the forecast position, and also then looking for efficiencies and savings as we move into the budget year and beyond. Now, the outcome of these budget meetings will be presented to the incoming Chief Constable as soon as possible, I'm sure. And of course, I'll be able to hopefully give you more detail around those, the impact and the outcome of those meetings when we go through the full budget report on the 31st of January next year. So moving on to the officer uplift. So the officer uplift data is included on page 7 and 8 of the report. So Staffordshire Police have continued to see an increase in officer numbers during the current year 21-22 as a result of the police officer uplift programme. So this includes 120 recruits in the current financial year, increasing to the 300 by the end of March 2023. So the total number of officers will therefore reach the target 1948.5 during this time, and that's shown on page 8 of the report. Now, if we can just move on to just look at some of the key areas of the announcement that was made by the Chancellor on the 27th of October. Importantly, as part of that announcement, the government has continued to commit to the Uplift programme that I've just talked about, and additional funding over the 3-year settlements period, because this is a 3-year announcement, is an additional 800 million for policing. Now, at the moment, we're not quite sure how that allocation is going to be distributed. We know it's obviously going to be allocated on a basis based upon that Uplift programme, but we'll have to wait for the settlement to come through before we see exactly what that position looks like for policing. The other part of the announcement by the Chancellor was around precept, and an announcement that was made that there is going to be a referendum limit set at £10 during the 3-year settlement period. So £10 for Staffordshire is an increase of 4.19%. And I know the Commissioner might want to say some words around this a little bit later, but the Commissioner is preparing a consultation to go out to the people of Staffordshire to gauge a view around levels of precept increase. The MTFS, just for your information, remains with an assumption of an increase set at 2.99%, so slightly below that referendum limit of £10. Also as well, I just want to just make it known, obviously there has been the announcement that the national insurance contributions are going up by 1.25%, so that for Staffordshire Police that's quite a big number. That's £1.2 million increase, but we know that the intention is from the government that increase will be funded through, we believe, through that additional £800 million that's been offered. But again, we'll have to wait and see the detail when it comes through as part of the settlement. So in terms of the refresh, I'll just, if I can just refer everybody to paragraph 1.5 at the early part of the report. So I'd just like to make it clear to the panel that this does include a positive picture for 22-23 with a reduced gap that we anticipate at the moment. So if we look at that table, we can see 3 clear elements that we're reporting. Firstly, the investment that was made following the report that was approved in January in the setting of the budget. So we've got investment into digital forensics. We've also now received information that the part of the Uplift grant, but the ring-fenced element is now going to be baselined or included every year, so we can actually incorporate that into our assumptions. And finally, we've got some capital financing benefits that we're seeing coming through, both from direct contributions to capital spend from revenue, but also from the profile of capital spend at the moment. So what we see on that table is a position for next year that we did have a gap of around about 3.3 million, and we're anticipating that gap going to reduce now next year down to around about 1.8 million. But the position as we look forward to 24-5, we previously had a gap of around about just over 5 million, and that gap still feels like it's around about that level. But as I say, we've got a significant amount of work to do during the budget setting process, and of course the Commissioner will be receiving updates from the police around their transformation, their savings programme, so we can actually get some detail around if that gap is 5 million by 24-5, exactly what the Chief Constable is proposing to do to deliver that saving that is required. So therefore, there's a significant amount of work that we've still got to do that we'll work through over the next few weeks in preparation for that budget and MTFS update report. So finally, I just want to make a note really for the panel around some of the pressures, and the Commissioner's already touched on this, things that make me a little bit nervous around pay awards for policing. The policing, actually, there was a pay pause this year, so there was no pay award for policing, although other areas of the public sector did receive a pay award. So firefighters, for example, received a 1.5% pay award, but policing didn't. So as the Chancellor's announced the removal of the pay pause, what does that do for next year? Does that mean that policing is going to see a catch-up from this year plus an inflationary award for next year? So we're sort of looking at the moment of potentially budgeting for a pay award of around about 4% is sort of something that we're discussing at the moment. So obviously that is quite a significant pressure. We've also got pressure Commissioner talked about pensions, but we have got pressure coming through from pensions, the impact of the age discrimination, the Sergeant McLeod. We know that employee contribution rates are going to be going up from 24.5, and at the moment we don't know quite what that impact's going to be. And then of course, at the moment, we've got all the uncertainty around prices in terms of costs, not just for gas and for electricity, but of course that's impacting on the capital programme in terms of the price of cost of materials, etc. So there is a significant knock-on into the capital programme as well. So in summary, Chairman, if I can just summarise, so I guess the good news is for the current year, the current year position, the reported position is positive. As we move into next year, that gap looks like we're going to be reducing it down from the 3.3 to the 1.8 million, which again is good news. But of course, I must caveat that around the uncertainties around costs that we've got at the moment. So we've got to balance all that and then bring that back to the panel for consideration on the 31st of January. So, Chairman, happy to take any questions on agenda item 6.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Very informative, and I think we will look forward to obviously the actual precept meeting coming forward. But I think it's a useful background information to see where we're going rather than having it all in the same time. So I welcome that as a way forward. So I do thank you for that. Yes, Keith Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Keith Walker. How close is the force to achieving the 120 extra police officers in this financial year?
Morning, Keith. It's on it. Actually, we're ahead of a number of other places, and we're ahead of our schedule at the start of the Uplift programme. So at the moment, there's absolutely no compromise or delay in the recruitment of officers. It's going really well. Nationally, it's over-recruited. More people want these positions than are available. So it's extremely positive. This isn't significant, but last night we learned we got one more coming as well. Government's decided to reallocate some 80 officers that were due to go into counter-terrorism. They've decided that's a slightly different recruitment process. So those 80 have been distributed across the country, and Staffordshire's going to get another one as part of the mix. So we're right on target. That's really been a very positive thing, and I believe we're still the top place in the country in terms of female applicants as well, about 54% of the recruits. I might be slightly out of date there, but it's a good positive mix and bodes well for the future.
You'd like a supplementary, Kate?
Please, Chair, if you don't mind. Just a couple of other queries, just to sort of clarify my understanding. In 1.22, it says that the additional employer contributions will add 1.2 million of additional cost on policing nationally, without any additional national funding. This is equivalent to a 1.4% increase in precept just to fund the transfer from policing to HM Treasury. Then further on at 1.26, it again refers to the national insurance increase of 1.25% will result in a new pressure of 1.2 million in 22-23. This additional employment tax is equivalent to the cost of 25 police officers. And then further on, it refers to the government uplift. There'll be an additional £800 million awarded to policing with the intention to fund uplift and also support the additional costs in relation to national insurance. So the three references to national insurance there all sort of indicating a different element. I'm just wondering whether it's necessary to include them all, or whether they need to be combined, or whether the force is going to have to pay national insurance contributions, or whether it's going to be the government.
You're absolutely correct. It's in three places, essentially, as far as I can read that, stating the same information and giving us slightly different contextual senses of how big that number is. There is the employee's contribution, and there is the employer's contribution, which is the cost to the organisation. We're anticipating that it's covered as part of the grant from government. The figures there about precept and number of officers, those are merely to give context about the amount of real cost that is, if it was to be met by the organisation outside the grant. Along with the inflation risk and the pay rise, you can see why our sense of comfort around the grant could quite quickly be absorbed. What I would say is the fact that the grant's over 3 years is tremendously well appreciated. Not being able to plan for the last few years, understandably because of the pandemic, but not being able to plan is a real problem. Being able to plan here is very helpful. I just think it's going to be a little bouncy until we understand exactly the implications of these rises. I take the point, David. We could perhaps have summarised that in one sentence. And have I missed anything, or am I missing a point?
No, you haven't. So I should have consolidated those points. So yeah. So thank you for that, Keith.
So, sorry, Chair. Just one final point. Could you explain point 1.25? Because it says the panel should note that whilst the uplift in police officer numbers mandated by central government is welcome, in essence, this ring fence is well over half the budget from efficiency savings and redesigns. This means that in relation to savings on employment costs, these can only come from police staff and PCSO roles. Does that mean there's going to be a reduction in police staff and PCSO roles?
I think what it's trying to say is, quite simply, is because of the police officer numbers are protected through the uplift. As we look towards transformation and delivering savings across policing and the Commissioner's office in the future, that's ring fenced, so we can't touch the number of police officers. So, for example, if we had to make a particular saving, then that would have to come from other areas of the force and the Commissioner's office, not from officer numbers.
Thank you. Adrian Bowen.
Thank you, Adrian Bowen. I think you know me by now, unfortunately for you. Just a question, please. You've mentioned, as ever, there's quite a number of uncertainties about the way the finances are going to go in future. And I just wondered, those uncertainties will all vary in terms of probability and severity. And I just wondered, which of all those is the one that would keep you awake at night, that if it doesn't go the way we want, will cause us the biggest problem? Secondly, if we're aware of that potential, then do we have a plan to deal with it? Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. I think the one that worries me most is the inflation, because it's outside our direct control. And it largely depends on what happens worldwide and what happens with the pandemic and coming back out of... The real issue there is huge problems in supply chains, organisations not getting parts and being able to charge more for where supply is restricted. So that could be a long-term problem, might not be. It really depends on where we are internationally. I think what's important is that we make a plan on some sensible assumptions, which we always do. We won't, or I won't be persuaded to err on the positive side on those things, but also I'll make sure that we've got reserves that cover contingencies should the numbers go more in a negative direction. I'm quite comfortable with where we are with reserves. They're not the highest, they're not the lowest, they're where they need to be. And I think we just need to make sure, certainly in the next 12 months, that we do have that flexibility. And if I may, just on the precept, we'll come back and talk about that a little more at future meetings, but I will be consulting on that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, just to gauge people's opinion. I know at the moment everybody is feeling the cost of living. I don't think it's going to get any less pressurised for individuals for some time, and I'm very, very conscious that if we ask for a little more through the council tax, we've got to have a really good argument for doing that. I think one of them in this next 12 months is that uncertainty. And it may be that if I am persuaded to go nearer to the permitted amount, it will be on the basis of getting us through that first 12 months and then maybe embedding some savings thereafter. We've got an awful lot still to do in this organisation to get it where I want it. And you'll see in the papers there's reference to the investment we're already making in the contact centre. This is specifically to improve one of the things that the public are concerned about. There are other areas where we need to make some changes, and there are plans, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to be at zero cost. But I'll be looking to make a very strong argument. Meanwhile, both organisations are involved in what we call challenge sessions, right the way through every department. What's the right size for your part of the organisation? What's an appropriate cost? And where can you contribute to these savings? As David's described, the savings pressure is less obvious next year than it was previously considered to be. But after the end of 3 years, it's still there. It just moves it on down the line. I'm looking for savings from technology, efficiencies, new ways of working, but also for organisations or parts of the organisation to accept what is the right size in terms of staffing and organisational costs. Just on that matter earlier, government has been very clear. They're not paying for increased officer numbers, for some forces then to say, actually we'll reduce our officer numbers. That is not an option. It's actually a diktat. You have the extra officers, the public want them, they voted for them in the general election, we're going to get them. Equally, they've been quite strong to say, and I think quite correctly, do not see that as a reason to go and remove civilian staff from the organisation. Make sure your organisation is the right size for the job you've got to do. There's funding here to help us do that. We need to be creative. We need to be thinking about how we do things efficiently. And that's where I want to get to. And the conversation with the public about how can you help me a bit or help us a bit will be one for the next month or so.
Thank you for that. Just one other question. I wasn't on this panel last year when the COVID lockdown appeared. COVID, you may have heard of it occasionally. So I don't really understand what impact it had. So there's quite a few rumbles at the moment, Chair, that potentially we could be heading for more lockdown next calendar year. And I just wondered, looking at history last year, does a major lockdown, what impact does that have on the budget and the performance of the MTFS, if any?
It's been interesting, Adrian. In some respects, it comes down to the demand and the nature of it. Actually, in some respects, demand dropped on the service, but then coming out of lockdown, it's really leapt up, and there are direct implications there around overtime. In the contact centre, in particular, we had people who were not in work. Either they were isolating or they were poorly, so service levels were compromised through that spell. And that's meant we need some initial extra investment there. So it's affected the organisation in many, many ways. Not being able to train at the pace we might have done, not being able to take people onto leadership programmes nationally, for example, means there's fewer people lining up for the next round of chief constables' roles. A bit like lorry drivers couldn't get their driving licences. Senior chief officers couldn't get the qualification to pitch for chief jobs. So there's been all sorts of implications all the way through, and the biggest impact was the uncertainty of all of that. You know, what are we going to be doing next week? If you're pulling back on leave because you're short of staff due to isolations and illness, there are cost implications on that too. And government did help us with some direct grants around COVID. The good news is through the year it hasn't really nailed the organisation. I think some forces are in a slightly different position to us, but we've managed it very well. And I think with the benefit of that experience, next year will be easier to manage. The biggest pressure for the organisation is we weren't ready for the elements of remote working that we could do. There's some technology reasons for that. So we're better placed, but an awful lot of the service can't work remotely anyway. You need to be in people's households on high streets and dealing with where the activity is. You can't do that from behind a screen at home, unfortunately. So it's a mixed picture, but it hasn't undermined us financially for this year, which is the good news, really.
Okay. Councillor Jones?
Good morning, welcome Commissioner. Councillor Brian Jones, Cannock Chase District Council. Reading through this report, it just really shows me what a complex business financing the police is. So can I congratulate you on the quality of the detail in the report. I'm also pleased to see the additional police numbers. I'm sure everybody in Staffordshire would welcome that, but I'm particularly heartened, Commissioner, that you make reference to the contact centre. That's, as you know, that's something close to my heart, where I think we need to get that right. So I'm very reassured by your comments to say that all those extra numbers won't be at the expense of the contact centre and the extra efforts you're putting into that. So I welcome that too, thank you. A question I have, which you may not be able to answer at this time, but it is relevant to finance. We've seen in the news the last couple of days about the government really doing a massive shift around the use of drugs and addressing county lines and all that stuff, and the frightening report, which I think we all perhaps suspected, I think it was that 50% of crimes such as burglary and robbery are committed by people who are either heroin addicts or crack addicts. So I'm really pleased that the government's taken this stance. Have you any early indications of what that will mean for Staffordshire in terms of money, or is that far too early to say? Thank you.
I think it's too early to know the detail for Staffordshire. I was really pleased to hear that news yesterday as well. To some degree, it's a reaffirmation of a determination to do something about this, because for the last 2 years they've really made progress already on county lines. We're already making good progress on drug treatment, but I was particularly keen to see, I think it may have been 150 million into drug treatment specifically. This is the key, and it ran right through the plan that we discussed last time. We need to be intervening early. We need to be supporting people that find themselves in these situations. The option to turn to crime to fund their addiction is the worst of all possible worlds, really, because then they're in with the criminals, they're exploited, they actually fuel that industry. If we can treat people, if we can help them get back into society, that is the most cost-effective way to deal with it. And as you've already intimated, the actual crime related to the drug trade, it's outside of that trade, it's into everything else, because people need money to feed their habits. So it's part of a concerted effort that's already paying dividends. We do a lot of the county line stuff in partnership with West Mids, West Mercia and Warwickshire in our regional organised crime unit, and they've had tremendous success again this year. There are still hundreds of these lines out there, and they need chopping off. As soon as they appear, they need cutting off. I was in Newcastle. I've been in Newcastle quite a lot, actually, over the last few weeks. But I was in Newcastle the other night, where the team had raided a property. They got 3 bags of marijuana that was all cut and ready to go on the street. It was very efficient for them, that was, because prior to cutting it would have been a lot more bags. These 3 bags were worth 350,000 quid. And bang, cut it off right at the bottom of the chain, working their way back up to the East Midlands. I think this organisation was involved, and there were some Vietnamese people there, essentially as modern slaves, running this program. So our neighbourhood teams, our response teams, our organised crime units are absolutely on this drug trade and the pain and distress it causes all of us. I don't believe they were asking the service yesterday to do anything without additional funding. So I'm encouraged by that, and we'll see what it means for Staffordshire. It feels like good news.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Edgeler.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Councillor Anne Edgeler. Commissioner, we've had this conversation before, but I just wondered how we can protect the most vulnerable in society. You're talking about county lines, and a lot of these people are suffering from mental health problems. And, you know, we've had a conversation as to these people that's not working, that are vulnerable, got mental health problems. They're receiving money from the government, and these creatures, shall I call them, the people that are the drug dealers and what have you, are exploiting these people by taking the money off them and spending it back in the drug trade. And so I just wondered what we can do as society to help these people and keep them, protect them really. And you talk about being in Newcastle. I remember many years ago, my son was beaten absolutely senseless in Newcastle, tied up with drugs. And even the police wouldn't even let me go and see him because he was so badly injured. So, you know, I just wondered what we can do, or what you can do. Because I tried, as I said, we've had this conversation, Ben, as I say, in the past, about people getting their, not being able to get power of attorney over their affairs, when you know that you've got family there that can protect them, but you can't because the laws won't allow it. So I just wondered what we can do, because it's all going back into the drug.
You're quite right, and the two are intrinsically linked. When we discussed the plan last time, I think you've seen my determination around mental health, working with the NHS and others around that side of it. One of the things that was not communicated perhaps as well as it should have been yesterday was government's ambition to have fewer people in prison as a result of their drug use. And I think that's an appropriate aim. I think there are people in prison due to mental health issues, addiction, drug issues, drug-related issues, that are better off treated in the community. So this programme is part of where we're already going to some degree, but it increases it, and I think it will help on both sides of that equation, as you've eloquently pointed out.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are you happy with the response? Okay. So I think we've concluded there on item 6. So members, it is for us to note the MTFS. Are we happy to note that and move forward on the agenda? Thank you. So item 7 is the MTFS for the Fire and Rescue Service. Commissioner, are you leading that?
Apologies, Chairman, I've sort of done both of those already. I'll pass on to David because there'll probably be some bits that are a little bit different. I sort of tried to put both pieces together, but yeah, there's 1 or 2 points around fire, excuse me.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to pick up some of the key points. The format for the update is very similar to the policing update, and I think the messages are quite similar for the Fire and Rescue Service when we look at the funding position as well, when we compare to policing as well. So the story is very, very similar, but the numbers, I'll go through just some of the key aspects of the report, if that's okay. But I'll try and do that fairly briefly. So again, if I just start off with the current financial position, so the reported position for the Fire and Rescue Service as at the end of October, so that's after 7 months of the year. So we were basically reporting a slightly favourable position of £400,000. Again, number of ups and downs contained within that £400,000 saving, but broadly, you know, we are looking at a favourable position for the year end. So we're looking at the moment that will be slightly below the set budget of £42 million for the year. Like policing, the fire and rescue service are quite well developed with a budget process for next year. Similar, we undergo in the fire and rescue service the budget challenge sessions. They're known within the fire as the Dragon's Den sessions, and really look forward to by all the budget holders. And basically that process is also supported by the principal management team. So there's always a senior member of the team present at all of those budget exercises. And basically through that exercise we look at current year performance, current year efficiencies, and look at the budget setting for the next year and the establishment and all the aspects of the budget. So we've gone through that process, and at the moment we're in a position where we have got some efficiencies and some savings that are coming through that, again, I'll be able to report to you in the new year. Importantly, the improved MTFS included a gap by 24/5 of around about £3 million for fire and rescue. Again, there's a table on 4.1 that takes us through a little bit of a journey really with reducing that gap by from 3 million down to around about 2 million during that period. And importantly as well, the position for the budget year 22-3, we're also reporting a reduced gap down from 1.7 million down to around about a £500,000. Now the main driver behind some of those changes is around the announcement that came through from the Chancellor, and importantly, as part of that announcement that came through from the Chancellor and the 3-year settlement, it was announced that core spending for authorities, which includes the Fire and Rescue Authority, would increase in real terms by about 3% year on year during the spending review period. Now that's quite important because we've previously been assuming that part of our funding, the revenue support grant, would continue to reduce slightly. So there's a positive that we reflected within that table in 4.1. We've also got some additional costs that we've reflected as well, which we've already talked around, is around impact of pay awards. There was a pay award for operational fire and rescue for firefighters in the current year, which was on the backdrop of a pay pause, so there's a 1.5 pay award. And also as well, we're looking at potentially around about a 3% increase next year on the backdrop of an MTFS assumption that was baselined at around about 2%. So there's basically a story there around some of the key variances that we're seeing this year. But overall, I'm pleased to report, Chairman, that financial position for next year looks slightly better, and the gap looks slightly better as we move into the medium term. Just I'll also mention as well, we talked about precept. The Chancellor has announced that the precept limit for authorities, which includes the Fire and Rescue Authority, is going to be set at 2%. So our MTFS assumes a 1.99% increase, and that's obviously in line now with the referendum limit that's been announced. But of course, the Commission will be going out to consult on the level of precept very shortly. We've already talked about the national insurance increase. We won't talk about that again, but we're assuming that it's going to be included within the overall funding level when it comes through as part of the settlement that we're expecting next week. So just to point out as well, the service has been undergoing a number of sessions with the Commissioner and the Commissioner's office. We've been looking at the transformation programme required within the Fire and Rescue Service in order to bridge that gap as we move forward. So I'm pleased to say that we've got aspects of that transformation programme. They're developing well, and I know the Commissioner is pleased with the progress that we've been making. Again, we'll include some more detail for you all within the budget paper and the MTFS update that comes through in the middle of February. So I think just to finalise, similar position for fire and policing, an slightly improving position for next year. Positive financial performance in year, but we've still got a gap within funding as we look into the medium term that we need to address. And I guess that's all on the backdrop of the uncertainty of pay, pensions and costs that are also putting pressure on our budgets as we move forward. But Chairman, happy to take any questions on the Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you very much for that brief. Any questions, members? Yes, Keith?
Thank you, Chair. Just one very brief one, again for my clarification. In 3.5, can you just explain what accruing deficiency cost is? Is that overtime, or is it a different payment? Or?
Yeah, so good question. So thank you. So basically, at certain points of the year, the crewing numbers may be lower than the establishment model, and that may be through sickness, through COVID, through long-term illness, etc. Or it might just be around timing of new recruits coming in and replacing members that are retiring. So we have seen deficiencies now crewing this year, so we incur overtime and additional shifts are taken up by firefighters in order to address that crewing shortfall. So in the year, we have seen probably slightly higher levels than we'd normally anticipate during the current year. But through the ongoing recruitment, we've got a recruits course that's been undertaken at the moment. So we'll see that position improve as we move into the new year, where that if you like, that shortfall will reduce. But we've been addressing that through, quite rightly, Keith, through overtime.
Okay. Any other questions, members? If not, we are now to note the report. Do we accept that and move on? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you, members. Moving on to agenda item 8, we have the consultation outcomes. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. Just like to pull out one or two notable bits of this, if you don't mind. Firstly, just to remind colleagues that GDPR, when it came in a couple of years ago, absolutely nailed our database of contacts. We had a lot of people that were in touch with the Commissioner's office, and because of GDPR, we weren't able to hold on to those. So I was quite pleased that despite that, we got over 1,260 responses to the two plans from all sorts of parts of our community. Went specifically to MPs, schools, business networks, volunteers, out to everybody who we could identify online with a particular interest in community safety, and got a lot of really positive feedback. Got a good, helpful chunk of negative feedback around certain things as well. There are things in the plan that wouldn't have been there, except for very, very well argued cases that came up during the consultation, which is exactly what it's about. Some criticism about the accessibility of the language, so I'm pleased that it feels in its final form a much more readable and plain English document. I'm hoping that you agree with that. So I was pleased with the response. I guess to some degree, if it's a perfect plan, nobody responds. However, that would be asking too much. So we did have a good response. This chart, I think, is quite interesting. Typically, in my experience, people will pay a lot of attention to the first 2 or 3 questions on a consultation exercise or a survey, less so to the end. But the fact that we're receiving some good responses there, right the way down to question 5 in each level, was very encouraging. And I think it means that that final one there about the fire and rescue service for tomorrow, 64% feel this is fundamentally important. Now, I'm actually not of the opinion that that's because they got tired of doing the survey. I think because they've gone to the end of the questions, that's a quite clear suggestion that that's not fully on their radar, to perhaps the degree that it's on mine. Interesting to note that quite a few of the people who respond to the surveys are associated with the services. They actually work for them, or they're internal, or they're linked to them in terms of partnership. So there is a conversation I've got to continue, I think, with the people that work in our fire and rescue service and work alongside them about why I think it's important to consider what else a fire and rescue service might be doing in the next few years. I'm quite determined to do that, because I think this is a service that needs to develop into new areas to continue to offer such a great professional service to all of us. They keep us safe. There's different things that we need keeping safe from in the future. There are pressures at the moment on our ambulance services, our NHS, where I think fire and rescue could help. And I think they're ready to help. But clearly, I need to communicate that a little bit better as we go through that process. Not looking for any of this stuff to happen in the first few weeks. This is a 2 or 3 year exercise. But I'm very hopeful that Staffordshire Fire and Rescue will be setting a way forward in a number of respects. Just on some of the priority responses, I was really very pleased to see on fire, people agreeing with us. More can be done to tackle underlying issues such as health inequalities. Absolutely, definitely we can do that. More work with schools, yes please. That was a good reminder, which we have enhanced in the plans, in both plans actually. On the police one, my core offer in priority 1 is essentially reiterated in people's personal comments, which was very pleasing. We saw references to road safety and road policing, which Helen and I were both delighted about. Interesting under reducing offending and re-offending, that's probably the area of response which got the most diverse responses. Some people very much looking to tackle the causes of crime, some people very much wanting to see more enforcement. We need to find the right path between both of those, and I know one is a lot less expensive in the long term to society, but the other is essential because some people are just simply not safe out in the public. And you're not supposed to end on a negative, are you? But I'm going to. This comment about, which kept coming up actually, and has done as I go around the county, around accessible stations that people can visit. I'm not going there. I'm not going to reopen the old style desk in stations, but I'm absolutely committed to people getting access to their frontline police officers and advice when they need it. When they want it, when they need it, they need to get it quicker, and we need our contact system and our response to improve. So they're the priorities, and they're sustainable and deliverable. It's not a good use of public money to be manning desks in buildings, I'm afraid. However, that's part of the sense of why this consultation was useful to me, because I was being challenged through it. I was being reminded of things that matter to some people, and the plan is not seeking to please everybody. It is seeking to find a deliverable way forward that's going to benefit the majority of us. So I was pleased with that. Happy to take some comments on that, and any last moment comments you've got on the plans, although essentially you've got in your possession there the final draft. What we're going to do is just tweak some of those infographics, some of the key points of activity, but other than that I think we're where we need to be with both these plans now.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that brief. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Councillor Tony Holmes. One of your fire and rescue, I've been talking to them recently, and down only 64%. Small ideas are get involved with the planning of things. There are no hydrants around the towns anymore. Getting access to new estates the roads aren't quite wide enough if somebody parks on either side of the roads. There needs to be fire and rescue plan in place for these new estates. Access to them are 9 times out of 10 not good for such as a fire unit getting in there. So your 64% could be around planning. The other ones I chatted to about this was elderly people could do with a visit from an officer every, well, whatever you want to call them, an officer every so often. Are you all right? How's your fire alarm? Keeping in mind that a lot of these old people don't even know when it's bleeping that the battery's gone in it. They think there's something wrong. And it could be quite easily handed down to your retirement people rather than using in-service officers. Perhaps a voluntary type thing being done. But the planning aspect can't be a voluntary thing. This is a slight criticism on the police. I was down in Cheadle, nice little village town, and I wanted to speak to an officer, and the only way you could do that was press a button on the outside of the police station. Nice, good idea, if there's somebody on the other end of it. 20 minutes, nobody came back. Bit annoyed. No officer walking around the town or whatever, but nobody responded to that button. If it had been an emergency, you know, what can I say? Sorry about that criticism, but it was real. That's me done, really. It was just a few ideas around the fire and rescue and the criticism about the buttons on the police stations.
Thank you, Councillor Howes. I think there was quite a few operational matters there. I don't know whether you wanted to comment on those, Commissioner.
I will, Chair. Just on the last one. Priority 1 of the police plan. And in fact, top of the priority list, improve the telephone online, 101 non-emergency, contacting Staffordshire Police, reduce the time taken to safely respond. The experience in Cheadle is exactly what we're setting out to fix. It just isn't where it needs to be. And it's getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. And it is, quite frankly, it ain't good enough. So that's why it's in the plan. That's why it's top of the plan, because it's got to get better. I appreciate your comments on the fire and rescue, and I totally agree with you. Getting professionals involved in that planning phase is the fundamental lesson from Grenfell. Getting people who really, really understand the risk of fire, the risk of public safety, the risk to buildings, the risk to individuals, involved in that process again is fundamental. I'm hoping government will legislate and get fire professionals back involved in that planning process. Equally around the infrastructure, hydrants and access, that has improved in the last 10-15 years in terms of access. It isn't just fire engines, it's ambulances and even waste collection vehicles struggle to get into some of the developments that were approved 20 years ago, unfortunately. But we've got to do more. And I was only talking about hydrants the other day. Now, somebody might correct me here. I think there was 39,000 hydrants in Staffordshire. That's a record I don't really want. I think it's an enormous number and way beyond some of the other places. But there's a programme of work to make sure that they are all safe, that they're in the right places, actually that we aren't maintaining ones that are no longer in an appropriate spot. But access to the hydrants and knowing where they are is a key piece of ongoing prevention work. And your final point about home visits, I mean, absolutely key, and you'll see in priority 3 on the plan. The top one there is that ensure that our home safety visitors are targeted at those most at risk. Now, this isn't just fire. This is about health risks, perhaps their visibility is poor, Perhaps they aren't keeping warm. Perhaps they've got a car on the drive and they shouldn't be driving anymore. Perhaps they just need someone to make contact and establish some social interaction. The service are really very determined to be smarter around the people that they are visiting in their home safety visits, and for it to be a wider reach. I think there is a room for some volunteers there, but where I want to go in terms of possibly offering a service for health as well is that our trained staff are also familiar with things like dealing with cardiac arrests, dealing with falls, dealing with incidents that might otherwise require a blue light run from an ambulance. And I think that's where I'm going with this conversation about what a future service looks like. I think that's about it, Tony. There was somebody actually saying in the feedback that because of the closer relationship with police, which is really positive, they felt the fire service was less linked to other partner organisations. Actually, I don't agree with that, but it ain't going to be like that. In the next 2 or 3 years, I want to build up these relationships again. If when Boris said the other day about the booster jabs, let's get everybody who's vulnerable jabbed up by the end of January, and we've got our fire and rescue guys out there, not just offering locations and remote vaccinations, but doing some of the jabbing, then that would be brilliant, I think, as far as the public are concerned. And I know there's a real appetite for that within the service. There's some that don't want to go there, but there are some that really do. They would rather save lives, keep people well, whilst doing their core job around safety and fire and rescue, but they want to be in those other places, and why wouldn't you? So hopefully that's a conversation we're going to have again and again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I've got Leslie Adams.
Hi, Councillor Adams, representing City Stoke-on-Trent. My colleagues just asked a couple of my questions or raised a few issues. I've got 3 points really. The first one is around, but I think you've just touched on this, Ben, to be fair, the link in between us as councillors and the professionals. Obviously, personally, from my personal point of view, I have a really good working relationship with my local police team, excellent relationship in fact. But 2 weeks ago I was at my MP organised a winter fair, and I came across the fire guys from Burslem there for the first time. They've invited me around to go and have a look at what goes on. They were highlighting the home visit programme. Really important, given that only at the weekend there was a really sad, serious fire on my ward, and there were 2 elderly people rescued from that. I don't know the details yet, but I'm assuming it would be something around the issues that were covered around, you know, older people not being sure what they're doing, not reacting to the smoke alarms, etc. So that's really important that I think we do that, and I was really impressed to see that going on, and I'm going to go and have a look at what goes on and try and work more closely with the fire as well as the police. My second point was that on the end of your plan, I'm reading about volunteers, and I know Tony touched on this slightly. We've got special constables, we've got the independent advisory group members, police cadet leaders, rural crime volunteers and safer street volunteers. Now, one of the biggest issues that I get approached to, and also my day job is market trader, so a lot of my residents come and visit me in the market and hit me with the problems. We do have police pop-ups in the market, but they all want to see those counters back open. Now, I do fully understand where you're coming from, that it's not a great use of public resources and police resources to have someone sitting on a counter all day. But is there no way that we could open them being run by volunteers? Is there, you know, the WVRS run the hospital canteens, etc. Is that not something that you could maybe at least look at and see if it was a feasible possibility to get a team of volunteers running, even not a full-time full front desk, but on those stations where there is desk facilities, or getting people out so that not could be run by volunteers, trained volunteers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Commissioner, do you want to come back on those?
Thank you, and I'm pleased to hear that you're establishing some new contacts with your fire team. You're going to see more of that. Actually, there seems to be a new enthusiasm from councillors and community representatives to seek out those relationships, which is welcome, but you're going to see it coming the other way. Both the new chiefs are absolutely determined that their teams embed themselves with their neighbourhoods and their communities. It's going to feel different. The fire and rescue service in particular have got a lot to offer that people aren't necessarily aware of, and they would appreciate your advice and help along the way too. So if you haven't made contact or heard from your local neighbourhood police and fire service, you're very likely to if you're a councillor in the next few weeks and months. The volunteering thing, Helen is going to be doing quite a bit of extensive work on volunteering with me. We're looking to expand opportunities for people to assist both services. We're out at the moment seeking volunteers to be on some of our independent scrutiny boards, where they can look at stop and search, use of violence, some other areas where people need reassurance that everything is as it should be, and having a good response to that. And there are people working in our custody suites, there are people helping right across the system, fantastic individuals. I definitely want more visibility of the service in busy places. So in your market hall, pop-ups on high streets, at markets on busy days. I think the extra officers, one of the benefits of them should be capacity to do that. One of the advantages of the work that the team are working on at the moment around a slightly different response and neighbourhood mix will mean increased capacity for officers to be out and about in busy places and meeting people. I think that's very different from somebody who would traditionally have gone to a station to report a problem or because they are fearful. Those people need to be speaking to the trained professionals as quickly as possible. My view is that somebody, more often than not, needs to go and see them, not for them to go into the building. When we were kids, actually I've been a bit cheeky there, Leslie, because perhaps it wasn't the case for yourself, but when I was a kid, a very long time ago, once or twice I had to go and present my documents because I was driving too quickly or whatever. It's just not necessary anymore for so much of our lives, the need to go to a station. It got to a point, I saw some figures from my predecessor's time, where we were getting maybe a handful of visits to a station a week. Now, if the choice is a handful of visits, where there is an alternative way to treat and look after those people, and they have to be right, by the way, the alternatives are not as good as they need to be at the minute. Where there is an alternative, having a desk manned on the off chance somebody would walk in is just not a good use of resource. That would be officers that would otherwise be in your market, on your high street, or in somebody's front room dealing with an issue in their household. And that's where I want them to be.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are you happy, Leslie, with the response? Thank you. Anne Edgeler?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I sit on the Stafford Planning Committee, actually, and the number of times, I'm picking up Councillor Holmes's comment about planning, the number of times we sat there in a committee meeting and said, this is not workable, the roads aren't wide enough and that, and then we get highways saying, it's no problem, you know, so I would welcome any input from the fire and rescue people or yourself, Commissioner, into any big planning application that we have coming in, because we have a hard battle fighting, trying to get these roads wide enough to be able to take the vehicles. So I welcome that. And I also welcome the fact that you're doing a lot of work on the 101 system, and because I picture vulnerable people sat there in their homes on their own, and the first protocol is a telephone, and they've got there sat at the side of them, you know, so if there's a problem, all they've got to do is pick it up, dial 101, and, you know, somebody answers it. So I'm really keen that you do a lot of work on that. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, I've got Jill Eason.
Councillor Jill Heeson, Newcastle Borough Council. I quite like the sound of the use of volunteers and partners to support our frontline services, but a concern I would have, purely because I've been in quite a few voluntary roles myself and various committees, it's really difficult to get people on board or to give up their time. So that would be the only concern I have, and obviously it sounds as though you're looking into that, but I'd be reassured, I suppose, when we get the feedback from how that's going.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Jill. I mean, we're not in the business of persuading people to do something they don't want to do. There's an awful lot of people out there at the moment putting their hands up. I don't know whether it's as a result of the pandemic. There seems to be a bigger determination to help people if they can. But we do recognise that you've got to be cautious about what you ask people to do, and also to offer them the support if they need it. The specials, by the way, they are special. The special constables are far more than volunteers, really. These are people with most of the warranted powers, and they are turning up almost on duty calls to assist in some pretty difficult situations. They'll assist with protests, they'll assist at football matches. It can get a bit tasty. So they are a real invaluable resource. We've got a very good specials contingent in Staffordshire, and they're an essential part of doing the job. But everything from that to somebody who occasionally wants to support somebody, or point out to somebody that they're concerned about someone, perhaps through Neighbourhood Watch or a Smart Alert exercise. There's a way you can get involved at all sorts of levels. I'd just like to see us taking more advantage of that, given the appetite of people to do more.
Thank you, Commissioner. Brian Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. A few general observations about the feedback that was given. I did the survey, and like many people, I could have ticked everything as a priority. And I understand it's really difficult to set these up. You have to, by nature, give a multi-choice and then have a free text box. But a comment I made in there, it would be nice to be asked what service perhaps we shouldn't be providing. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, back in the day, we used to collect dogs and used to do all manner of things that really had nothing to do with the police service as such. So I'd perhaps like to see something in like that. I agree with you again. It's disappointing that we had less people responding, but fully accept the reasons that you outlined, Commissioner. But I think that does tend to get the people to reply who are passionate one way or the other. So the ones lock them up and throw the key away, and the other ones who are perhaps more supportive of taking people away from crime. So I think that's an inevitability. I was particularly pleased to hear you say, when my colleague pointed out that annoying circumstance about the lack of service. But I'm absolutely with you that we shouldn't be opening all these police stations and having police officers sitting around waiting for hours. I think that's just a throwback to society wanting the Dixon of Dock Green scenario. Society's moved on, policing's moved on, resources are precious. So I actually commend you for listening to the feedback, but actually kicking back if you think that actually that's not where the best service can be provided. So well done for that, Commissioner. And just a final point on the building links with the fire service. Rob Barber, true to his word, after he came here, he sent out an email, do you want to have closer links with your local fire commanders, and I, on behalf of my district, have contacted a chap whose name escapes me, but he was the coordinator. It was fantastic. Put me in touch with all the people, and we've already got some meetings being set up to create those closer links. So I think that's a really positive thing as well. Thank you.
Just on your first point, it is very difficult putting these consultations together, and actually quite a lot of the feedback we got written. I wanted to just understand if and I sort of set it out, so am I making the right choices here? I did want to hear from people about those core elements, but in the plan there are dozens of priority bullet points. They weren't all in the online consultation. It would have just driven people bananas, I think, at that point. So the core ones are there, and then I'm personally really keen on, we were looking at in detail, is that feedback. Quite a lot of it said, you haven't mentioned X, you haven't mentioned Y. They are in the plan, and they were in the plan. Clearly they'd gone to the consultation and not read the whole plan, which is fair enough, I can understand that. So that was helpful. You know, you might have missed this. Actually, no, we haven't, but good. It's those one or two things where actually you've mentioned this, or I've heard you talking about this, and I can't see it in the plan. That was really helpful. There are one or two areas around that. Schools was one, protests, managing protests was another. So those needed to go in. But it is difficult. Now, I am keen, and we're looking at as an office, how we're going to do surveys in the future, more around satisfaction and what an area feels is important to them. So it's a slightly different thing from here's our plan to drive operational progress, but I do want to get a sense from the public about what they think really matters. It's going to be a slightly different and a more detailed type of work. And I also want to go not just to the engaged. With that, I want to pick up from people who aren't going to respond to a consultation, but have a very clear view, because then you tend to hear from those that might just say, look, it's all a waste of money, why don't you just not bother? I want to hear from them as much as the ones that live and breathe this stuff.
Thank you, Commissioner. Tony Holmes, you want to come back?
Thank you. It's just a little bit of clarification to what I've asked you for. As Anne's pointed out, and myself, we both were in borough planning, and we did write to the fire officer at the time, pre the new fire officer, and no response whatsoever. So, clarification for the planning, we have tried to contact but got none back. A bit more clarification, I did say your retired officers as volunteers. I know a few of them didn't want to leave the fire station, but they met a certain, or didn't meet a certain standard and had to retire. But they didn't want to leave, they wanted to be part of it. The other bit about, and this is smack wrists for me, is about the elderly. My mother's 95 years old and her alarm's going off. What does she do? Picks up the phone and phones me. So what's the matter? My alarm's going off. My alarm's going off. So I listened. I said, open all the doors and the windows now. It was a CO2 alarm, not a fire alarm. So that was my fault. I should have explained to her which one was which. But again, at 95 years old, it's going off. I'm frightened. You know, didn't know what to do. And this is why I brought up the elderly visits, because on my rounds walking around the village, there's quite a few of those ladies and gentlemen out there. Because they're two white plastic boxes, it's going off. I need the fire brigade. You know, and all it is open your windows, get your doors open, press the button, reset it, and phone the gas board. Thank you. Just thought I'd add a little bit of clarification. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, a point made, Tony, and a good one. will pick up on the retired officer. I know there's an appetite from both services in that sense. The planning one's more difficult because we're looking for legislation change. And this, I mean, I've been in planning. I've got to say I'm glad I'm not still in planning. I don't envy you. Generally, the agencies are obliged to essentially determine applications to the law. So what the guidance is, and highways might not like the idea the road's narrow, but the developer will build the road as narrow as he can get away with, or they can get away with within the law. And it's an observation for highways to make. I would like fire to be more engaged, as they were in the past, in that planning process, and we're hopeful that that will come as a result of the Grenfell inquiry, phase 2. Unfortunately, a large percentage of fires and call-outs for the police do relate to vulnerable people, quite often elderly. They aren't able necessarily to leave their property very quickly, or to make decisions in their own interests. And I don't know whether any of you observed my performance session with the Chief Fire Officer a week or so ago from the Oak Room, but we talked about this for quite a while. They are absolutely determined to offer a wider service, checking the CO2 alarm, checking the smoke alarms, checking what we used to call the sloppy slippers thing, make sure that people's falls risks were reduced by checking their carpets. All of that sort of stuff, it can be part of that visit, a sort of wider safety visit for people who perhaps are on the edge of dementia or need support. Why not? And every moment you spend in those houses is more valuable than people who do have a family full or do have friends and neighbours that are doing those things for them. It's about identifying where the risk is. So we are on that journey.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I've got Jill, and then I think we'll draw this to a conclusion on this item. Jill?
Hi, I don't think I need to introduce myself again. It's just a comment following on from one of my colleagues. I did do the survey myself, and I did put a comment in, you might imagine, about resources for antisocial behaviour in town centres. I do have to say, though, that I have to commend my local police commander, particularly since our meeting with Ben. We've had quite a responsive service in the town centre. It's had quite an impact on antisocial behaviour, particularly working with the marshals that we've got. And as a result, it's a lot nicer place to come along to. So it's quite nice to see that positive action.
Thank you. No, I did say I'd close it to on this one, but Adrian, you indicated to speak.
I looked at him very pleadingly and said, let me just have one more question, please. Seriously, on item 2.1, the recommendation, it mentions that the panel consider the outcomes of this consultation process and note the Commissioner's amendments as a result prior to publication. So, a bit of a leading question. I just wonder, Commissioner, do you actually anticipate the plan, the draft plan, being amended in one or more ways as a direct result of this consultation?
It's already moved. I mean, this final version looks quite different from the original. Certainly the language around the two sections at the back, the criminal justice and the offending piece, it's much plainer language about what we're setting out to achieve, partly as a result of the challenge around how we're going to performance manage this that came from this room last time I was here. More reference to schools, reference to rural, reference to environmental crime. I mentioned protests before, managing those. It's going to be an issue for Staffordshire over the next few years with HS2 coming along. So there have been a number of significant references as a result of the consultation process. To be fair, none of it wasn't on my radar, as it were, but it wasn't specifically in the plan and needed to be. So those amendments are already there, which is for me the measure of a consultation that is real, rather than just a sort of a polite request for people's views. We've taken the consultation very seriously.
Okay, thank you very much for the Commissioner. I think that's been quite an interesting debate on that item. So under the recommendation, we're to consider the outcomes of the consultation and note the Commissioner's amendments and result prior to publication. Are we happy with that recommendation, members? Okay, thank you very much. Going on to our next item on the agenda will be let's see where I am, the annual conference for the Police, Fire and Crime panel. I did attend that with the chairman. The report is part of the agenda. I'm happy to take any comments where I can. Thank you. I'll take that as a resounding success. So moving on to the next item agenda, we have questions from panel members. Do panel members have any questions for the Commissioner? Again, I think that the cold is starting to beat us. So we will move on. And we've got dates for the future meetings and work programme. So that's before you, members. Are there any comments to be made or requiring clarification? Again, I'm looking round and I take that we can take that as read. And on that, I will duly close the meeting and I'll call it 11:32. Thank you for your attendance and wishing you all a very, very Merry Christmas, and a hot cup of coffee or chocolate is going to be welcome. Thank you all.